Hello and welcome to our webinar, Addressing the Gender Gap in Workplace Absence. I'm Georgina from eDays. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are, eDays is a leading provider of absence and leave management software, and we serve hundreds of organisations of various sizes all around the world. We're here today to discuss the gender absence gap, in particular that women in the UK take more sickness leave than men and have done so every year since 1995. You can see the agenda here, which will largely focus on discussing some of the possible reasons behind the gender absence gap and what businesses can do to address it. As people are joining, let us know in the chat what you think is the number one reason why women are taking more work absences than men. And we also have a question, which I will start in the chat now, which is according to 2021 ONS data, in which age group is the gender gap absence between men and women the highest? Go ahead and select which one you think it is, and we'll touch back on that later. We have two guest speakers joining us today. They are Stephanie Reid, who is a wellbeing consultant specialising in menopause consultancy and training, and Natalie Duvall, who is a businesswoman, a podcaster at Black Mums Upfront, and she is also the culture marketing manager at Red Bull UK. I'm also joined by my colleague Jenny from eDays, who I will hand you over to in a moment, as she will be hosting the main part of this webinar. So on to the introductions. Stephanie, I'll ask you to say a little bit about yourself.
I'm Stephanie Reid and I'm from Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I am a menopause consultant and trainer, and I have been for the last 7 and the reason why I started doing this was I found myself going through the menopause and there was no support, no information around it. So to do that and bring knowledge and information to women, to workplaces, to explain what the menopause was, what it means, and how you can manage and, sort of work if that's what you want to do.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Good to have you with us. And Natalie, I'll ask the same to you.
Hi, so I'm Natalie Duvall. I am a mum of 2. So I have a 9-year-old who is with me right now because of the teacher strikes, and a 12-year-old who was managed to get into school because the teachers there are amazing as well. So they made sure that they had provisions for them. I'm a culture manager at Red Bull UK, so I look after all the dance and music stuff there. I'm also a podcaster on Black Mums Upfront, where we advocate for women, especially Black women, when it comes to disparities and just life. And I have my own business called March Muses, where we created Christmas decorations of colour. And we were featured on Dragon's Den last year, where we were able to get funding from Peter Jones and Deborah Meaden. And it's been a crazy journey. So I have my fingers in lots and lots and lots of pies.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Great to have you both with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping then. This webinar will last for about 45 minutes. Please do send us questions or comments into the chat if you have any. We'll keep an eye on this and respond to some as we go along. The presentation slides that you can see will be sent to you via email following this webinar. They've got some interesting facts and stats in there, not all of which we'll be covering in detail today, so we will get those over to you. Last time we did this, we did have a slight technical issue where the slides weren't showing for everyone. So if they do disappear, we'll carry on and we'll send them to you at the end. And now I'll hand you over to Jenny.
Thank you, Georgina. Let's dive straight into the discussion then. So first up, what is the gender absence gap and what does it mean? You can obviously see on screen at the minute that according to the most recent ONS data, men lost 1.8% of their working hours in 2021, while women lost 2.6%. So obviously that's quite a disparity. What do we think that means for women then? Natalie, I'll come to you first. What do you think that impact that has?
Well, I mean, does what it says on the tin. It's obviously very impactful, not just in the workplace, but also for women and their confidence in terms of, sickness, injury. I know with women, I myself had 2 children, so maternity was obviously a huge thing. Returning back to work was even harder. And when we are absent, when our children are sick, this is a little bit stereotypical, but usually the mum is the one who has to kind of do all the work and maybe like stay up all night. I mean, dads do help as well. But I know with my children, and I was a single mum as well, that it was mainly me. And it knocked my confidence a lot. Even when returning back to work, I wasn't sure when I could return to work. I wasn't sure, especially when they're ill. And they come home with a lot of illnesses as well. These kids, they know how to pick up every disease going. And so it was, you do worry about losing your job, and you do worry, can I be a good employee or should I be a good parent? And you're always tussling with the idea of you have to go to work like you don't have kids, but obviously you do. And so it's a statistic that is hard to swallow, but hopefully there is change coming ahead. I know, especially yesterday, there was a lot when it came to childcare in what the government were talking about in terms of their budget. And that is, when we say a step, that's at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And we're definitely going to get on to more about working mums and culture and things like that very shortly. So I think a lot of people will be excited to see what you guys have to say. Stephanie, what do you think? Is there anything that you'd like to add about, what does that gap kind of mean? What consequences could there be for women?
Well, again, what Natalie said there, women do take up the bulk of children, and if a child is sick, they take time off work for that. But there's also the fact that due to us being women, we primarily susceptible to certain things. Like, a young girl in her 20s could have issues around her periods, and that could affect her going into work. Somebody who's maybe having children or can't have children, maybe getting treatment for that involves time off as well, if they're getting IV and stuff like that. So there's lots of things that force a woman to work that necessarily wouldn't be the same man. And that does have consequences, on their earning potential now, as they're going through their career, but it also has an impact on their pension, because there is a pension gap as well. So it does have an impact on that.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And it's, like you say, it affects women at all kind of stages. So it'd be great to talk about that more. Just looking at the poll results, actually, from the audience. So we've got some guesses as to which age group the gender gap was the highest in. 29% of you have said the 25 to 34 bracket. 53% have said the 35 to 49. 12% have said 50 to 64, and 6% have said the 65 plus. The answer is actually the 50 to 64 bracket, which I thought was really interesting. And it kind of leads nicely into our first topic, which is female health, because obviously that is the kind of age bracket where women might be going through menopause. Stephanie, what do you think about that? Does that surprise you that the gap is the highest there, or is that kind of what you would expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with employees right across the UK and Europe, and there is a gap there at that age, and it's directly related to the menopause and some of the conditions that you would get from the menopause as well, like maybe osteoporosis would be one of those, who breaks their hip, or they trip over and they put their hand out and they break a wrist. They're off work for that, so that could be part of it as well. So there's lots of reasons as to why it is the highest, but it would be directly related to menopause.
And what is the impact of menopause on absence then? Is there a lot that impacts women in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, there is 6.5 million women in the workplace from the age of up to 65. So we are a big demographic, and we're getting bigger every year. So that is part of the issue. There is also the fact that, nearly 1 million women have left work to their menopause and not being supported with their menopause during work. So that's 1 in 10 women are leaving because they're not getting support. The number of tribunals have increased from 5 in 2015 to over 22 last year, and the women have won everything. So there is an issue that is happening there around the support that is needed to keep women in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to support, legislation, all that kind of thing. I mean, Spain has actually just become the first country in Europe to introduce menstrual leave legislation, which is, great news. Europe certainly aren't the first to do it. There are other countries who are already doing it. Natalie, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that legislation is the way forward? Do you think this is the first step in the right direction?
I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I think this legislation in particular, I think it's good and also bad. I think there isn't enough diversity in the boardroom for this to actually come through. I feel like when you look at diversity and you look at the boardrooms, what do you see? You see white men in there. And so for them to have a view of understanding what a menstrual cycle is, obviously they know what periods are, but they've never felt it. They never know what it is like to wake up in the middle of the night and having cramps, or to be on a bus wondering, oh gosh, is something happening down below. The terror of wearing white and you've come on your period. Like, they will never, ever understand that fear. And I feel like that sometimes is a barrier to entry for legislations like this, because then it also puts men, they're back up on the wall a little bit. And I think, once we start looking at that gap and looking at the authority gap as well, and who has authority in these boardrooms, I think then these legislations can actually come and really blossom and really be playing a huge part in what we do. I truly believe when America were doing affirmative action, I sometimes feel like that's what we need to do. We have to just to readdress the balance, and then once the balance is there, then we can take that affirmative action out, because you've already got the diversity in that boardroom.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And like you say, it's getting those people together to create that action that will kind of drive things forward. I mean, would policies across the board kind of help everyone? Stephanie, do you think like menopause policies should be a thing, for example? We've got someone raising that exact question in the chat. Is that something that you think would help?
Yes, it does, because it's giving you clear guidelines, what, first of menopause is, what the symptoms are, how that can impact women in the workplace. And also it's about putting, and the supports don't have to be long. The supports really work best if they're targeted and done properly. So say somebody's having issues from the menopause and been really, really exhausted. So it's about looking at, well, maybe you can have a period of working from home, or some sort of agile period while you get your sleep sorted, or get some sort of support in there to help you with that. That's what we're looking at. It's about changing uniforms. I always say, why don't you have a woman of 50 in the room when you're designing and picking uniforms? Because we have different needs than a 20-year-old. We need to be able to move, have layers so we can take it off when we get hot flushes and put it in when we get cold. That helps us. It doesn't have to be the big expense. It can be small things that actually really, really impact the women in the workplace. And that's really, what I sort of empower women to ask for, and also tell the companies, this is going to be the best way for you to do this. And a policy, having everything written out, what you can do, what the risk assessments are, what's available, is it flexible working, is it start time, is it whatever it is, having those laid out so you can go, oh, I can do this, and I can do it for a specific period of time until I get there. Because even taking HRT or something like that might take 3 to 6 months to kick in properly. So doing something for somebody, for a support package for a short period of time, will work, and will keep that person in work. Because there's
I think it's really interesting.
A big cost.
I'm just looking at some of these comments, and Karen saying, I have deliberately not introduced a menopause policy, as I believe that we need a life course approach to women's health. And I sometimes feel with that type of thinking, and as a Black woman, obviously I was very affected by the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff. It's almost like you're putting it all under menopause is one thing. And it affects people the same way. Menopause affects people in so many different aspects.
Absolutely.
And so just having just a life course approach to it, I think you're actually deminimizing it. And it's like when people say, oh, well, yes, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. Yes, all lives do matter. But right now, the focus was on Black lives. I'm not saying that you can't focus on anything. I'm not saying that, just because I love to support cats, means that I hate dogs. I'm not saying that, but it's all about balance. And I feel like just having a life course approach to women's health, it's not as simple as that, because like, you know, there's so many different nuances to menopause, to menstrual cycles, to children, to all of those kind of things. I think we have to, if we want employers who are in this kind of century being forward thinking and to get the best out of their employees, by putting these policies in place, it means that you care. It means that I can be the best person that I can be, and I can go above and beyond because I know that you're going above and beyond for myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so true, and it's about meeting everyone. Yeah,
a policy from menstruation right would actually be better than doing a separate menopause policy, because it does impact across, you know, from your 20s, you know, having your period, difficulties with it, you know, the possibility of having children or not having children, what that brings with it as well. And then you go into the menopause. So having a policy that covers all of that possibly would be a better one, having specific policies for different things. But I think having guidelines or a policy is really, really, really important, because, as Natalie says, it shows that people and keeping them in.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, it's about getting people in the room that represent, you know, the workforce, be it people of different ages, people of different genders, cultures, religions, colours, everything.
Absolutely.
You know, as those conversations going.
As Natalie said, menopause impacts people differently. We're not all the same. You know, the thing is, 60% of us sit in symptoms, 25% have severe symptoms, and that can be very, very difficult and very, very hard to deal with. And 15% have not mild symptoms. I come from a family of 5 girls, and we all cover all of it from severe to the mild. So, you know, you can't, one of us she still hasn't had a hot flush, and she's 63. And that's just the way she's made. She's very, very lucky. She's very, very, we sit and stick pins in her, so we do, because she's so lucky. But that's just the way it is. It goes across that whole spectrum.
Yeah, and it's about employers kind of providing the support that's needed, like you say, rather than maybe a blanket approach. I mean, we've got a lot of different women's issues being mentioned in the chat, you know, endometriosis, surgery, hysterectomies. There's obviously everything outside of a woman's menstrual cycle as well. Do you think a lot of these things come with a kind of taboo or a certain level of self-consciousness, you know, if you're in like a male-dominated space in particular? How do we kind of break down those barriers, do you think? Stephanie, we'll come to you first.
Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, we were a production company in London, and we went and did a talk to all the men about the menopause. And brilliant. They were really, really engaged. They asked loads of questions. They were going like, this is understanding. Like younger ones were saying, I haven't understand what my mum's like, why she's in a bad mood. And the husbands were saying, I can now actually have a conversation about this, you know, so enjoyed it and found it very, very useful. So, you know, there is hope out there. It's about education. It's about awareness, about taking away that stigma and about our bodies, because this is natural. This is what we go through. It's a natural, normal transition, the menopause, as our puberty is. So actually talking about that and being open about it and talking about all the things, you know, when I do my sort of menopause training, we do go into detail about certain things and all like that there. And everybody loves it because they're having an opportunity to talk about what they're going through and understand that I'm not alone, and that there are other people going through this as well. And that's really, really important for the women to hear that.
Yeah, definitely.
And to normalize it.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing as well. Karen has just said in the chat, a holistic framework to kind of address women's different health issues, and doing things that are meaningful rather than a sort of tick box policy or exercise is the kind of way forward. Natalie, do you agree? Does it need to be kind of customized? Or
I feel like a policy is a start, and it's how you interpret that policy. Obviously, where I work at Red Bull, we have one-to-one check-ins, and every manager is going to manage differently, and some might do it as a tick box, but not all will. But having something in place is what the important thing is. Yes, a holistic framework is great, but if you don't have a policy in place, and it's just gonna fall by the wayside and nothing's gonna happen. So, yes, some will take it as a tick box, but then if they are doing it as a tick box, then where is the manager training? Where does that, what's happening with that? Why is that manager only doing a tick box? And that's the question. And if you are a big company, like I know I've seen that we've got Tesco's in here and stuff like that. So, you might have the ability to get a support worker or someone who's a expert in that field to come and help with manager training when it comes to things like that. So I definitely feel like policy is a good way to start, and it's how you interpret that policy. And I think if you give your managers freedom to interpret it, it won't always just be a tick list. They should then be able to have that meaningful one-to-one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that brings us on nicely then, if we move on a little bit from female health onto the sort of culture and things like that, because like you say, it's about manager training, and it's about that message coming straight from the top. Another big kind of area of culture is flexibility. And like we were talking about earlier, women are typically the main caregivers. So Natalie, how do you think that plays a part in absence? Do you think that, I think you mentioned earlier, if your children are off sick, or like today, if there's strikes, people might have to ring in sick. Like, how does that kind of affect that overall absence figure, do you think?
Of course, it affects it hugely. And again, it affects the woman's confidence in thinking, oh, maybe this job isn't for me. And then going for maybe a lower paying job where they are completely overqualified for. And so it's a bit of that imposter syndrome. And I think when we had 2020, when we had COVID and all that kind of stuff, I think what came out of that personally for me was a bit more confidence, a confidence to actually say, well, actually, I did a year and a half, whatever, at home working, especially if you're in that corporate setting where it is a corporate job and it's a 9 to 5 in an office. A lot of us did work from home and we managed to do the work still. And so it's kind of using that as an example. Well, I was very productive then. I can still be productive now. And I mean, COVID, it's quite traumatic with the homeschooling that we had to go through. But what I absolutely loved, what COVID did bring out, was that I no longer have to drop my kids off at 7:30 in the morning to get to work at 9, because that's not productive. And up until 2020, that's what I was doing. I was dropping my kids off at 7:30 for the breakfast club, which was costing me lots of money, and then running to the tube station to get to Covent Garden or London Bridge for 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. And so when you work in a 9 to 5 office environment, flexibility is key. So now I'm able to drop my child off, have a lovely morning with them, get to work around quarter to 10, like between quarter to 10 and 10:30. And I myself are a much calmer person. I haven't been on that run, and I can take on the day a bit more. And the change in my productivity has just skyrocketed because I wasn't doing that mad rush. And I have to say, my mornings are a mad rush. I'm the worst in the morning. So if you've seen Home Alone, and when they wake up and it's, we're late, like that's me every single morning. So it's that flexibility has helped me to be more productive at work, and also given me a bit more money back. So I'm not having to spend so much money on the breakfast club. And so then I don't feel so broke all the time. I don't feel so tired all the time. And it's those small nuances, that's a very small change, but it's those small nuances that can actually change a person completely.
Definitely. And like you say, that flexibility, whether it be around hours or location, obviously if a business is able to, certain people like manufacturing and things might not be able to offer it. But Stephanie, do you think flexibility would help with women in menopause as well? I mean, you mentioned uniform earlier. Like, is there other areas that businesses could be flexible with?
Absolutely. Flexible working, or the ability to come in just a couple of days has really, really helped an awful lot of menopausal women, because the symptoms that you would get, sort of some of them, and then that impacts you the next day. That means that you're more accident prone, more likely to trip, more, all of those type of things on the physical level. It also impairs cognitively. You can't you know, can't react quickly enough. You're sort of, you have difficulty, you know, doing simple tasks. So it happened, and, you know, you have to go into work and perform, puts an awful lot of pressure. And when you're stressed going through the menopause, that actually exasperates your symptoms and makes them worse. So a woman like I stressed up, they get into work, they have a few hot flushes, oh my goodness. They then forget their boss's name because they've had a brain fog moment, and that makes them feel worse. And then all of a sudden, whereas as Natalie said, you know, they didn't have that rush into work, they were able to log on at their computer from home. They're not having the hot flush, they're not having the brain fog, more relaxed, and they're in control. So actually working from home can be a lot better for a lot of menopausal women, especially those who would suffer from psychological issues. We know there's sudden onset anxiety, depression, the mood swings, the irritability, and the brain fog when you just can't remember people's names. A bit of information just seems to drop out of your head when you're asked a question, and you're sitting there feeling like, and then you get more stressed. And so being away from that stress can actually help menopause very much. So actually working from home or having that flexibility is really, really good. And the other thing I would suggest
definitely
as well is, you know, in the workplace, especially your shifts, you know, make sure that women have access to toilets and toilet breaks, because UTIs like 60% over the age of 45, and that's directly related to having the menopause. And if you don't have access to water and go into the toilet, then that's really, really basics that you need to be providing, and having time out as well, because sometimes you just get overwhelmed, you get too hot, you get, and just minutes, breathe a bit and come back in again, and you're all right. As I said, it doesn't have to be.
Also,
Sorry.
no, I was just going to say it's life. So unfortunately, life a lot of life happens between 9 and 5. And a really good example, I've been trying to contact to talk about my pension to Aviva. That's what I think this with, and their opening hours are 9 a.m. to 5 a.m., 5 p.m., Monday to Friday. So they're not open on the weekends. And that you'll find that a lot. Some doctor surgeries, they only have a small amount on a Saturday kind of thing. And with women's health, our health, you know, and men's as well, but we have a lot more ailments. We have the menstrual cycle, we have a lot more hormones. Even if you're trying to get pregnant, you're the one that needs to go to these appointments. If you're having IVF, you're the one who has to be there. Your partner can be there and should be there, but he doesn't have to. You have to show up. And these appointments aren't done necessarily on a Sunday at midday. And if they are done, they've got that one slot that everyone's trying to get. You know, it's during the week. So you're going to be absent, and it's that understanding that things unfortunately happen between 9 and 5. Life happens between 9 and 5. So having that flexibility from an employer who understands that you might be on the phone trying to get through to whoever for a very long time, so it might be longer than your 15-minute break, and not having that stress of like, I've got to go quickly, like it means so much for that person. So it's understanding that life happens as well between 9 to 5 as well as work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so true. I think like you say, a lot of it as well, you've both mentioned that kind of stress and that kind of buildup of things that can happen without flexibility. We've actually got a stat on the screen right now, which is 42% of women are experiencing burnout compared to 35% of men. So we know that this kind of cycle of trying to have it all and juggling their healthcare concerns and their children and all these other things are kind of leading to that kind of toxic cycle. I mean, Natalie, how do you think we can kind of break it, hopefully, or start to address breaking it?
I mean, toxic is such a great word because that's exactly what it is. I think it's a lot of unlearning. Number one, it's a lot of unlearning. And so I think sometimes there's only so much we can do with this generation and these kind of thought and these thought leaders and these leaders in the game right now. And whenever I talk about race and how to talk to your children about race, I always talk about we are raising the next generation of business owners. We are raising the next generations of caregivers, of change makers, of all these kind of things. So for me, a lot of it starts with our children. A lot of it starts with our education of our children, because they are the ones who are going to be making these policies, not very long, in like maybe 20, 30 years time, they're going to be making these policies. So I think education is key for our children. And then for employers, I'm a very visual learner. I like to listen to different things. And I think it's really simple. If you don't understand something, if you don't know something, it's about going out there and seeking the knowledge and being proactive about that, especially if you are a manager. A really, really silly example, my daughter was asking me about periods and what is a period. And I started going down the road of, well, we all have eggs inside us and then they come out. And then she said, oh, so am I a chicken? I said, no, you're not a chicken. But, you know, it's a thing about, you know, these eggs, when you want to have a baby, they're important. But I don't want to have a baby. I said, no, you're not going to have a baby. And I just ballsed it up. And so what did I do? I got a book. I read about it. I understood it. I came back and then I smashed that conversation out the park. So it is about that, the culture of what you're doing. As a manager, you've got that responsibility as well. And not even as a manager, you might be an employer seeing another employee struggling, and you can advocate for them as well. Sometimes advocating, and that's what I love about where I work, that whenever we do talk about women's health and black and brown and stuff, it's not always me saying it. I have advocates who aren't black and brown, who are maybe sometimes men, who will advocate for us and make the change. So there's always something that you can do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of businesses are kind of prioritizing those conversations. Like you say, there's a lot of people who are trying to speak up for others and to learn about topics that they might have just either not noticed before or that they know that they themselves are not part of. So
because that's
it's
what
great.
Burnout is. The more, if I was at work and I was the only person talking about these things, that's where the burnout starts to happen, because you feel like you're just repeating yourself, no one's listening to you. So when you have those allies who come in and support you and lift you up, oh my goodness, it makes you feel so much better. You become emotional because it feels like you're not the only one banging on about it. And so allyship and advocating, you know, if you feel like you can't do something, that support can change a mindset, can change the burnout into something completely different.
Yeah, and we've got people agreeing with the chat as well. Anna Maria has just said allyship is key. So it's great to see that we've got some agreement there. I guess then to kind of wrap up the discussion, and just because we're kind of getting close to time now, what can businesses do to kind of address the gender gap then? If we've got people on this webinar today who are thinking, I really want to take action based on what I've heard, what do we think businesses can kind of do? Stephanie, we'll come to you first.
What we've all been discussing here, having a policy guidelines around this, you know, having education around, you know, what can happen to women, especially since we're talking about the gender absence gaps, you know, from when they start work at 18 right the whole way through to 65 or 68 when they retire. You know, have a discussion about needs, because when I go out and do stuff around the menopause and I tell people, I says, this is not just about reproduction and your sex. You know, your hormone actually very important from head right down to your toe. Estrogen plays a part in our brain health, plays a part in our heart health, our liver health, bone health, all of that. So it's really, really important that we understand what is happening, what is going on in our bodies, so that we can make informed choices about how we're going to have our menopause and about our long-term health, coming in and supporting us, because there is actually a pool out there of nearly 400,000 women who are eligible to be working but won't return to the workplace unless they get support to help them with their menopause. So there's a pool of people out there wanting to work. There's a lot of women in work, and some of them are leaving. So it's about actually you know, the policies in, putting education stuff in, training managers, you know, what is how could you recognize that one of your staff, what type of support would you be able to give them, or advice, or signpost them? You know, what internal resources do you have? What external resources? There's lots out there that they can be doing. And some of the real ones that are really addressing this now are taking this on and training up people to be menopause champions in the workplace, like a mental health champion. So women have someone to go and talk to, not necessarily within the management, but just to even maybe go, I'm having a bad day. What do we do about this? And just be able to have have that offload just to the work. So having people like that in place is really, really useful as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point. And I guess the key takeaway from today's discussion is that before you can take action, it's all about that understanding and getting to the root of those issues. Natalie, do you agree? Do you think that it's more about that learning and to have visibility of why your staff are off and what may be going on in their lives? Because like you say, life is not outside of 9 to 5, is it?
Yeah, I think it's we need to look at the language that we use. So when we're looking at like job descriptions, for example, using language like I need someone who's assertive and competitive and ambitious, those are really scary words for someone who probably is all that. But especially when you're returning back to work from being out, sometimes you do lose yourself. So it's looking at how we can change our language with how we talk to women in these spaces, making sure that we have a good manager training, like so making sure that, good manager training, making sure that there is management women in the leadership level. And if you can't get that, then that we have some diversity champions, or you are mentoring women to get into that space. And so you are supporting their growth. And then productivity. Although I might have taken 2 days off this week from work, but my productivity has not changed. And because women go the extra mile, we do. And so I will always make sure that the job is done. So it's, she's been off for 2 days, but did her productivity change? Looking at, okay, why was she off for 2 days? Okay, how can we support her? All those things makes a great employee. And if you invest in the employee will invest back and will feel like they belong and that they have a sense of belonging and they want to do the best that they can do.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point. And I think we're about getting to the edge of time, just conscious of that. So we haven't actually had time to go through all the questions in the chat because there has actually been a lot of comments and a lot of engagement. So we just want to thank everyone who's watching that's really got involved in the discussion because, it's such a great kind of topic. I'm going to hand back over to Georgina just to kind of wrap things up. But thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really interesting discussion. I hope everyone watching enjoyed it. And thank you for all of your comments and questions. Just to round off, I'd like to say a big, big thank you to Natalie and Stephanie for joining us today. You can find them both on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect with them. And if you'd like to find out more information about how eDays can help you understand and address your absence rates, please do visit our website, e-days.com, where you can learn more about us and book a personalised demo. Today's webinar will be available to watch again on demand if you wish to, and as I mentioned, the slides will also be sent to you. So thank you very much for everyone who's joined us today, and we hope to see you again in a future webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.